Hi, Edward.
Hey,
Okay, my name is Irfan. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
All right. So now we're just going to chat to you about MotoGP is coming up. The first race on the 28th of March. But first of all, when we talk about MotoGP, who's your all-time favorite rider and why?
Tough question to start with. I've got to stay neutral, or I have to stay as neutral as I can because I'm hosting the show. So I can't really have any favorites. But what I would say is that we are just incredibly lucky to have two of arguably the greatest ever MotoGP riders racing at the same time. Valentino Rossi, 7 Premier Class titles, second on the all-time list, and just a great representative of the sport, and his popularity just really transcends MotoGP, doesn't it? I mean, I meet people who might not necessarily know what happens week in, week out, but they all know Valentino, whether they're huge MotoGP fans or not. And he's such a great guy personally as well. Whenever I'm on site, and regardless of whether he's had a bad result, a DNF, or just things haven't gone his way, he's still always up to give you the time of day to go through the debrief and give you a play-by-play of what went wrong. And he's always got time for you. So a great human being and a great sportsman is Rossi. But then Marc Marquez as well, third on the all-time list, one less Premier Class title than Rossi, but could potentially finish as the greatest MotoGP rider ever in terms of Premier Class titles. He does things on a bike that you just don't think can happen on a bike. He's superhuman. One of his nicknames is the Alien, and you can understand why, because what he does is just otherworldly. The lean angles, getting his pads down. Some of the saves are just worth the entrance fee or watching the race alone, just to see how Marc Marquez stays on that bike. And I'm sure we'll get into it. A lot of question marks over when he comes back, how he'll come back. But just to be able to have Rossi and Marquez on the same grid at the same time is just how incredibly fortunate we are as MotoGP fans.
All right. Now, speaking about Marc Marquez, he's out from the race last season, but he might be, making his comeback this season. So, question is, when he's back, do you think he will, continue to dominate straight away, or it's going to be hard for him to find that form that he had before?
Yeah, that's perhaps the biggest question of the season, isn't it? First of all, when he's going to return, we don't even know that yet. He's on the entry list for the first race of the season in Doha, but I don't think many of us expected him to take to the grid for that first race. But then he was over there in Qatar last week to get his vaccine, and there was a great story that he was in the hotel, in the gym, and nobody else realized it had come in, all the other riders. And I think Maverick Vinales stepped into the gym and saw Marc Marquez there just pumping some iron. Apparently he's put on a lot more muscle during this off season as well. And Vinales was like, oh man, I thought I had some time to get some good results in before you came back. It's all mental games with Marquez. And then just a couple of days ago, he actually took to the track in Barcelona on a Honda road bike that looked pretty similar to a MotoGP bike, although you're not allowed to test on a MotoGP bike outside of the official test sessions. But he was looking pretty fearsome. And if you just look at some of the footage of that, you talk about how he's going to come back and mentally what kind of shape he's going to be. And he was putting his arms down, the arm that had the issues throughout all of last year, down on the asphalt. He looked like the Marc Marquez of old. Of course, the Marc Marquez of old used to ride like he's invincible, like nothing could stop him, nothing could affect him. And last year has really shown that that's not what's going to happen anymore. An injury that kept him out for essentially the entirety of last year. So you would think that they're not going to rush things. We saw what happened last year when they rushed him back. It ended up being more damaging. So you think that he's going to take things slow to begin with, perhaps ease his way back into competition. But I mean, at the end of the day, Marc Marquez is Marc Marquez, right? Once the visor goes down, you can fully see him going back to the competitive rider that he always has been. Whether that's going to end up being detrimental, we'll have to wait and see. But it would be very hard to see Marc Marquez suddenly become a conservative rider, settling for, I don't know, 5th or 6th place. He always wants to finish as the top dog.
All right. Hopefully he will come back soon and we'll see him back in races and so on. But another rider that you talked about just now was Valentino Rossi. So Rossi joined with his new team this season. So that of course will, for us Malaysian fans, we're like definitely excited to see him race. for him, what role do you think he will play with the new team? Whether he will give a new insight to the team, or what can the team learn from him? And in terms of performance, where do you see him, or how do you see him perform this season?
It's huge, isn't it? I mean, just thinking back to when Petronas Yamaha SRT launched their project, I was in KL at the Petronas Towers, and they unveiled Morbidelli and Quartararo, and you thought, okay, a couple of good, promising riders. Let's see how they do. And now they've got arguably the greatest rider of all time racing for them. And last year, of course, Franco Morbidelli finished second in the championship, and the team is just going from strength to strength. I think it's a great move for all involved. I know some people talk about it as a demotion for Rossi because it's the first time in 20 odd years that he won't be in the factory team. But I think a fresh start is exactly what he needs. He's going through that drought at the moment. As we all know, no race wins since 2017, no championship wins since 2009. But also, he's been going through a tough time within the factory because there's a lot of pressure to be the lead rider, especially when you got somebody like Maverick Vinales alongside him who was outscoring him and outperforming him. And also a lot of the responsibility of developing the bike falls on Rossi's shoulders as well. So I think now that he's with the satellite team, there'll be a lot more freedom and he can ride without the pressure that has really seemed to weigh him down in recent years. Just in testing a couple of days ago in Qatar, he set his fastest ever lap around the Losail International Circuit aboard that Petronas machine. And he came out in his debrief looking like an excited kid at Christmas. He said that he's really enjoying racing again, and it just feels like a new start. And it's a race-winning package as well. We saw that. It was arguably the most competitive bike on the grid, just as long as Yamaha can sort out those inconsistency issues that really plagued them last year and put an end to a couple of championship hopes in Quartararo and in Morbidelli. And having Morbidelli alongside him, I think, is fantastic as well, because Morbidelli freely admits that he would not be in this sport if it were not for Valentino Rossi. Rossi really nurtured him. He's been his mentor. And I know that they say with teammates, your first job is always to beat your teammate. And there will be an aspect of that. But I think Rossi, in his twilight years, is also looking to give back, and particularly give back to his VR46 Academy riders. So all the information, all the data, all the feedback he can help give to Morbidelli, I think will help Morbidelli as well. And as a result, help the entire team.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be a great, partnership, forming with Morbidelli and Rossi. But you speaking about the test, or the preseason test and so on. Based on the tests that you've seen or the results that you've seen, by far, which team is the most promising from your point of view?
I think Jack Miller's looked very good in testing. He finished on top of the timesheets, and I think aboard the factory Ducati, he could be really competitive this year. Last year was such a disappointment for Ducati. They had a lot of internal issues. They had two riders who, for most of the season, knew that they weren't going to be there next season in Dovi and Petrucci. So there was no real impetus for them to really give 100% anymore. And you could tell the vibe in that garage wasn't right. But for Miller now, he's got so much incentive to show the factory that he is the one to take the project forward. Everybody's on these one-year contracts at the moment, waiting for the big reset in 2022. So he's got a lot to prove. And with that Desmo Sedici in particular, you have to be a real beast to ride it, to race wins. And Miller is exactly that. Whereas Dovi would sometimes take some risks. He was called the professor because he always judges risk over reward. We know that Miller is just going to try and go for the reward every single time. And I think he's perfectly suited to that Ducati. And we saw it in testing, just how good he can be. And alongside him, Pecco Bagnaia, who also had some issues last year with injury, and then an engine blow up cost him a podium. But he's looking like a different man this time around aboard that factory Ducati. And I think those two could be a real contender for, if not the Riders' Championship, but for the Team's Championship. And then Yamaha as well. I mean, Qatar is traditionally a Yamaha track. I know Ducatis have won it the past couple of years, but out of those, I'd have to say Fabio Quartararo, ex-Petronas man. A championship contender last year for so long, got off to that fantastic start with the 2 race wins, and everybody thought, okay, the Frenchman's going to take this title with considerable ease. And then it all fell apart towards the latter stages. I spoke to him recently, and he freely admitted that one of the reasons why it didn't go according to plan was that mentally he'd never been in that position before. He'd never competed for a championship. He was never a title contender, and he said that he got too focused on that title, how many points he needed each race, and forgot about just the pure racing aspect, which is what led him to all the success at the start of the season. So he's brought in a sports psychologist this year to help him with that mental aspect. And if Yamaha can sort out the bike, a lot of questions still about which spec bike Quartararo will race, because the 2019 one was actually a lot better under Franco than the 2021. If they can sort all that out, then I think Fabio could be a real contender.
All right, okay, and like you speak, you talk about the championship and everything. Even needing a psychiatrist just to keep your mental focus. And speaking about maybe it's too early to talk about who's going to win and so on. But looking back from last year, One Mir and Morbidelli, between those two, who do you think will carry the form from last season to this season?
I mean, you kind of have to go with Mir because he's the reigning world champ, right? But what I would say, and it's interesting you talk about the mental state, pressure got to Mir as well. I mean, these are all young guys, Mir, Quartararo, they've only been in the Premier class for a couple of years. So you can understand why this is all very new to them with a title on the line. But we saw in Valencia in particular, you could tell the pressure really got to Mir. He crashed out in FP4 and then he just kind of scraped over the line to win the title last year. And in that regard, I think Franco Morbidelli has a cooler head on his shoulders. I've always been so impressed by Morbidelli and just how mature he is. We spoke to him recently as well, and he knows what he has to do this season. He was a little bit surprised that he ended up finishing runner-up, especially how the season started, and all eyes were on Fabio, of course. But now he's realized that he can be a true contender, and he's going to change his mental state to come into this season, knowing that if he can put in some results from the start, he's going to be able to potentially go on further than he did last year and win the title. And we mentioned as well Rossi alongside him. I think Rossi will really help as well. Because when you have Fabio next to him, as he did last year and the year before, you've got two young guys in similar states, similar moments of panic and frenzy sometimes. But if you've got Valentino Rossi alongside you, who has been his mentor for so long, giving him this advice, if he can give him the advice in the garage ahead of a race, I think that's going to be so beneficial for Morbidelli.
Right. And exciting times ahead. And of course, we can't wait for the season to start. And speaking about, the first race, will be in Qatar. Based on your opinion, in your experience and so on, what are the key moments that are we looking for in that first race?
Yeah, it's a strange one because normally this season we'd have had the preseason test in Sepang as well, and the Sepang shakedown. So we'd have a better idea of where the bikes are and where the riders are. Now we're just looking at one combined timesheet to really give us an indicator of how the first race is going to go. And especially because it's only been one test, this is the time when teams and factories try out a lot of different combinations. So just because they finish high on the timesheet might not necessarily dictate how they're going to go in the race. I would say that the Yamahas are most likely to do well in Qatar, given how they've gone in the past. And I could quite feasibly see an all Yamaha podium in perhaps Quartararo, Morbidelli, and Vinales. If anybody's going to breach that all Yamaha trio, I would say it would be Miller on the Ducati. He likes riding under the lights, and he's the kind of guy who will want to put down a marker from the very start. And what's different this year, obviously last year we didn't get any races for the Premier class in Qatar. Now we've got two back-to-back at the Losail International Circuit. So you're going to want to get off to a good start, because despite the fact that we've got 19 races scheduled with a couple more on reserve in Argentina, America, that need to be rescheduled, you never know with this pandemic, and the season could get shortened, it could get moved around. So to have the opportunity to do well in the first two races at the start is going to be huge. 50 points up for grabs. So there's a whole lot to play for in just a couple of weeks.
All right. And last question to you, Edward. Again about the first race, you spoke about there might be all three Yamahas on podium, but who will you think? This is just for fun and a super early prediction. Yeah. So who's going to be like 1, 2, and 3?
Quartararo, Vinales, Morbidelli. But don't hold me to it. Please don't play this after the race finishes.
No. It's a fun prediction. So yeah, I think that's about it. It was very informational. Speaking to you and everything. And all the best for the coverage for the upcoming MotoGP.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to talk to you.
Thank you, Edward.